All right, welcome to Better Mental Health, a podcast for men looking to build a resource and community around destigmatizing men's mental health. I'm Blair.
I'm Jamie.
And I'm Blake. And today we're stepping into a pretty controversial corner of the internet, which is the Manosphere. So we'll talk about red pill rhetoric, alpha male influencers, and forums that speak to and for the modern man. We'll talk about how the Manosphere shapes male identity, where it intersects with actual real pain that men are experiencing and isolation, and also where it goes pretty dangerously off course. So let's get into it.
Yeah, this content, I'm nervous to talk about it, to be honest.
Me too.
Usually our conversations are kind of around our own experiences, so this is more like a larger topic, and I'm a little nervous about it, but yeah, I'm excited about it. The Manosphere content seems to be really resonating with a lot of young men, so we thought it was really important to dive into this topic and discuss it as a group here. The way that I've been able to learn about the Manosphere, or how I've learned about the Manosphere, is that it is basically four categories, or main categories of online content or the online world. There's the pickup artists, or PUAs, I think it's called, involuntary celibates, which we've touched on in previous episodes a little bit, men's rights activists, MRAs, and then men going their own way. I'm not going to do that, whatchamacallit, the acronym, because that's just ridiculous. But all of it kind of surrounds this idea of the red pill.
Yeah.
We mentioned that in the intro, the red pill rhetoric. Jamie, do you want to give us like a little bit of a preview of what the red pill even means?
Yeah, red pill, I mean, it stems from the Matrix. It's like you can either choose the red pill and leave the Matrix, or what is it, enter the Matrix, or
Yeah.
leave the Matrix, or you can take the blue pill. And so like these men are sort of acting like they've chosen the red pill by entering the Manosphere, whereas we are crazy blue pill, liberal, woke feminist men.
Yeah, all the different things.
The other thing, like Blair, you're mentioning all these four categories. I feel like the Manosphere also extends out to these other places that are more subtle. Like the categories you're talking about are the like deeply ingrained categories, but I think that there are places that it permeates out to, like the Joe Rogan, like the Theo Von, the Jordan Peterson. They're not as overtly talking about these concepts as sort of Manosphere.
They're like fringe Manosphere. And that's kind of like, they're like the gateway drug to get into the Manosphere. And what I kind of noticed was we talked about a few different categories of the Manosphere itself, but I think there's a few categories of these like gateways. Because you see like a lot of fitness influencers, entrepreneurs who have like a social media presence. These are things that young men are like interested in. They're interested in, getting in shape. They're interested in maybe starting a business and making money. That is what gets them interested in hearing about those topics. And then those same influencers also then maybe have a few radical ideas here and there, or, maybe have some.
Or a lot.
What's that?
Or a lot of radical ideas.
Or a lot, yeah. And so because you're already following this influencer, and maybe they have helped you in some ways, because as I'm sure we'll get into, Blair, I think you and I forget if you have, Jamie, we've read one of Jordan Peterson's books. And there's some good ideas in there, but some things just about how to help get your life on track, how to help you get organized and have goals and things like that. None of those are bad ideas, but then he's got some pretty interesting ideas about masculinity, and so we can kind of get into some of that.
Hypergamy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this like, what do they call it? Like this pop evolutionary psychology. It's trying to be based in some form or some sort of academic research, etc. But it's honestly is kind of just their own take, their own interpretation of flawed data sets. So it's fascinating. We watched. I didn't watch all of it, to be completely forthright, of this. Gosh, this YouTuber who did a 2.5 hour deep dive into the Manosphere, debunking all of the BS that they put out on the internet. It's fascinating. It's really amazing. We should probably put a link in the description to make sure people can watch that. But yeah, there's so many good things in that. But hypergamy was one of them. I don't know if we want to start there, but if people have not heard this term, we just looked it up before starting our episode just to make sure we had the correct definition for it. It was the idea that specifically women date up the like social hierarchy, date or have sex with men who are, this is all, obviously we're talking about heteronormative, heterosexual leaning, or identifying people. So women dating this up the social ladder, social hierarchy ladder, and then leaving what is at the bottom 80% of men to kind of fend over, the women who have not chosen to do that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's this kind of
Fascinating.
ridiculous idea that there's like this social hierarchy that, exclusively women will try to date above their means to gain whatever, more socioeconomic power, money, comfort, luxury, that type of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and to me, it feels like a way for men to find blame in somebody else for if things are going
Yeah.
wrong in their lives. And not saying that sometimes things don't happen in relationships where maybe a guy was cheated on, something like that happened. But then at that point he's in a position to look for any excuse to blame women for all the problems. And so it's this sort of false like scientific like term
Hmm.
to make it give it some legitimacy in their mind of like, oh yeah, women are hypergamous and that's why I'm lonely, that's why nobody wants me. It's
Yeah.
it's just looking for somebody to blame.
Yeah. That video I referenced, there was a quote from it that I thought was fascinating. I put it in our externalize their self-confidence and masculinity issues and solely place the blame on women. That's how
Hmm.
the like tidbits of potential scientific fact are twisted and contorted to like blaming women and making it someone else's fault besides looking inward, which is interesting because feel like that's what Jordan Peterson initially, the book that we were describing, I think it was what 12 rules for life for
Yeah,
living or
something
something.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was all like an internal exploration of like what are you doing to make your life better and focusing on
Right.
what you can do to make your life better, which was like great. That's what we should be doing. Is
Yeah.
focusing on what we can do internally to make our
Hmm.
lives better and to make the experience that we want. But
Yeah.
yeah, this it's been kind of co-opted from
Yeah.
the
Hmm.
manosphere. Manosphere has co-opted these ideas and just
Yeah.
completely blown them into something different
Yeah.
altogether.
What they've provided for men though is a community and a safe space to have feelings, be emotionally reactive, and air out their grievances. And so a lot of men have found basically a world to belong to. And I think that that's what's missing outside of the manosphere is community spaces for men to belong and actually have a safe space to talk about feelings and talk about the troubles that they're having in relationships and have a healthy way of communicating it about it. And so I think the thing that I think we could take away or learn from the manosphere is how can we build community for men, but have
Yeah.
it be healthy community and have it be something where they can learn and grow.
That's kind of the ironic thing about the manosphere that I'm noticing, Jamie, is I think these guys are looking for a community and they find themselves in this manosphere community. But the ideals that the manosphere kind of preaches are probably the exact opposite of the things that would actually help you from a mental health standpoint,
Right.
because it's like this hyper masculine, push your feelings down, you just, grind it out,
Hmm.
you do your own thing and not deal with your emotions. You're
Yeah.
just kind of suppressing all that. So it's a community, but it's not necessarily one that's promoting like, hey, let's discuss some of the challenges that you're facing in a real way. It's a let's find blame on
Yeah.
certain groups or certain individuals. We find community because we're all actively working against this group or we all dislike this group. So to me, it's like a false sense of community.
Yeah, I feel like it's an initial step. So like one aspect of like being an emotional being, like I think like men are way more sensitive than we're willing to admit. And like, as sort of like a collective, like men are very sensitive and they act tough and there's so much that they hold on to. And so what I mean when I'm talking about this community is sort of like airing out their grievances and being emotional is they're being emotional. They're sort of taking the first step of like venting out and externalizing, blaming women, which obviously is not the problem. But at the same time, there needs to be some way for men to let out and express feelings.
Hmm.
And so they're getting sort of like an initial step, but then they're not able to take that further and actually learn and process and
Integrate.
then do the inner work that you were talking about, Blair, that like turning it back on themselves and being reminded that, hey, you can actually change and learn and grow from these emotions and these feelings, and maybe these feelings are a little misplaced, or like be guided in a different direction.
Yeah, I feel like what the difference is like unhealthy emotional expression versus healthy emotional expression. And it's like
Yeah.
unhealthy
Yeah.
emotional expression is when you're just like, I'm angry at women because I can't have sex with
Hmm.
them. It's like, all right, let's try and
Yeah.
figure out what's happening in your life that's making it so that women don't want to have sex with you. Like
Hmm.
it's I feel like
Yeah.
there's so
Yeah.
much information that is being left out of these communities where, they're just like, no, women won't have sex with me, so it's got to be their fault. It's like, all right, well, let's talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, and the problem with these, especially like the podcasters, like, we watch some of the, like the Fresh and Fit podcast, where they like bring on women who are probably there because they want some publicity, so they pay them to be on there. They don't really prompt them on what they're going to talk about. Then they just look for these like gotcha moment clips where like she
Hmm.
says something that just validates all this hypergamy stuff. And then that clip gets blasted everywhere. And if you're somebody who's perpetually online because you're lonely, you're a lonely guy, you haven't found that community yet, you start to see this type of content. And then of course, social media today, the algorithm is just going to feed you more and more of this and get you angrier and angrier to the point where you think, yeah, all women are like this. I've seen 10 clips in the last 30 minutes where these women displayed hypergamous, traits or
Hmm.
um, and so it must be true for everybody. And that's, probably a whole different discussion, but that's one of the dangers of the world we live in today with social media and these algorithms, and how controversy is what draws attention and clicks and likes and all that. And that's what a lot
Yeah.
of these types of guys seem to be cashing in on, is like the controversy and the anger, and
And the
it's
loneliness
Yeah.
scary.
and the isolation. I feel
Hmm.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe
And loneliness.
a point that we're not necessarily touching on is like, when did this kind of like take off? Like, yes, it has been around on the periphery for years and years, but it feels like around 2020 is when things started to like really ramp up. I mean, I'm sure again before that, and I'm sure any women on here who have been, privy to terrible treatment for years and years and years probably will be like, no, it's been forever. But I feel like in terms
Yeah.
of the actual manosphere, I feel like it's only been maybe the last 5 to 10 years that it's really, really taken off. And I think a huge part of that is the isolation and the like separation that we've all felt from, things like COVID, etc. But yeah,
Hmm.
just wanted to throw that
Hmm.
part out there too.
Yeah. One of the thoughts I was having last night when I was reflecting on this is I'm grateful that I grew up before the manosphere and the internet sort of blew up in I think at the impressionable age that this could have become in our orbit. I don't think it existed in the way that it does now.
Mm.
And I think there were things that we could have been influenced by and were influenced by that were manosphere adjacent. And I'd be interested for us to talk about how we
Yeah.
could have fallen into it, or like things we saw at that age. But yeah, I feel lucky because it would have been easy to fall into it.
Yeah, we were talking just a little bit before we hit record, and I was remembering that probably 19, 20 years old or so, there was like a YouTube channel that I would watch sometimes. It's like these three guys who are about the same age, 19 or 20 or whatever. Their channel was about like how to talk to girls, how to talk to women. Some of the videos were pretty innocent. Like it was really just showing guys like, look, it's really not that hard. Like a lot of guys are afraid to talk to women. They think it's scary. They don't know how to do it. And so some of the videos were just saying, hey, look, I'm going to go in a wheelchair. I'm going to sit in a wheelchair and I'll go up to a random girl on the street and have a conversation with her. That piece of it was like, oh, okay. Yeah. As like a shy person, like that's kind of cool to see
Hmm.
that, like, oh yeah, maybe it's really not that bad. But then it kind of would get into like I'm going to see if we can find a girl to make out with by the end of the night. And then it kind of turned into more of like a conquest type of
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
again, but that was the slippery slope of educational or like videos that are helping
Hmm.
you to overcome a fear of yours, which is fine. But then that transitions into something that's maybe not
Yeah.
as healthy.
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That was a way I could have slipped into the manosphere for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
I was gonna
Right.
say that that's like the general progression of things. It's like, all right, so we're gonna like give you this content that's like, yeah, again, helpful potentially. Put the like ableism thing aside with pretending to be in a wheelchair. But the way that they're giving this content was like very much like, all right, so if I can do it, you can do it. Like it's actually great. But then like you have to kind of go somewhere from there. You need to ramp up like the content that you're creating in order to get clicks. And I feel like that's kind of the reason that the manosphere became what it is because it has to get you again, we talked about it before, but like the more controversy you stir up, the more clicks you're getting and the more money you're going to be making. So yeah, that's just the algorithm itself is kind of an issue in and of itself.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I feel like I could have fallen into it in like the fitness realm. I think that's like another area where so many men, like, I want to learn how to be jacked. Like that would be something that would be cool, you know? And so you like watch some videos of guys here or there talking about whatever they're doing, and then they become cool figures to you or, you know, somebody to look up to.
With that, I'm curious, the appeal of that content to you, like getting jacked, was that in order to attract women to you, or was it more like healthy living? Like, I guess that's because I feel like that's the difference
Right.
potentially of what the content's
Yeah.
intentions are.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that like it depends on when you ask me that question. Like in like high school and college, I think it was yeah, for to attract the opposite sex. But
Mhm.
yeah, that was the other thing that I was reflecting on is in one of the areas I feel like I can sort of empathize with the young men growing up now is going through puberty and being a teenage boy, you're just, at least my experience was, I was thinking about sex all the time. Like you're just trying to figure out, navigate, talking to the opposite sex, like you were mentioning, Blake, trying to figure out how to be attractive. And like the ultimate goal is having sex. And I don't know if that was because society was pushing me in that direction or if that was just my hormones driving me, but that's a really impressionable time. And you're so caught up in your hormones that it's just so easy to fall under the influence of somebody giving you guidance at that time when for me I didn't have a dad who explained any of this stuff to me,
Yeah.
and so I had no guidance and I was alone, and fortunately I had some good male role models through like summer camp, or mainly that was the only place. But
I wanted to jump in real quick. Just you're mentioning of your dad not being necessarily someone to have taught you like how to talk to women.
yeah.
My dad died when I was 24, but like I remember like maybe a year or two before. So in my early 20s, my brother and I were talking to him and just kind of joking with him like, "Dad, you never like taught us how to talk to women. Like that was such a miss, a miss on your part." Like totally joking with him. But he was like, "What are you talking about? I told you."
It's so
And
fun.
he like went and like put his arm around he was like, "This is how you do it." He like put his arm around my brother and he's like, "Hey, you're looking sharp." And I was like, "Oh, Dad, never mind. This is why you didn't teach us." I was like, never
Yeah,
in a
Yeah,
million
it's
yeah,
years.
good.
yeah,
Maybe it was a good thing you
Yeah,
didn't teach us.
exactly. I'm
yeah.
curious also, Jamie, if you had talked to your dad about that, if you'd been like, you never taught me. No.
No,
Okay.
no. I know because like your experience was with your dad, I know that his guidance would have been terrible. It would have been absolute shit. But yeah, so I guess, yeah, going back to what I was saying, the one thing that I just think that these men who are in these positions in the manosphere are preying on that aspect of young men, and they're using that to their advantage. It feels like they're manipulating young men,
It's
and
predatory.
Yeah,
yeah, it's predatory. Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah,
yeah,
it's very predatory. And
100%.
so that's the part where I wish we could reach young men and help them see that they're being manipulated in that
Mhm.
way.
Yeah, yeah, because interesting. I mean, the three of us, I think, all have successful, healthy relationships with women. Jamie, you and I are both married and have been for a while. Blair,
Hmm.
you're in a long-term relationship. We have totally polarized beliefs from this whole manosphere
Yeah.
concept. So it's not that that's the only way. You follow that advice and then you'll get what you want. So it's just interesting why that seems to be the path that more and more of these guys are falling down. And it
Because
is
it's so
interesting.
much easier to blame
Yeah,
women and hate women than it is to be like, all right, I need to do something and change something within myself
yeah,
to like attract women or to make myself attractive to women.
yeah. But
Hmm.
that's what's kind of
But
interesting is because a lot of these like fringe manosphere influencers that we were kind of talking about, the fitness influencers or the entrepreneur influencers, they're talking about here's how you can improve yourself, here's how you can get in shape, here's how you can make more money. But at the root of it seems to be you're doing this just to put yourself at that higher social level because women are only interested in the the higher like
Hmm.
socially, what's the word I'm looking for? They're on a
Social
higher
status.
social, yeah. And so it's like
but
here's how you put yourself there because women are so hypergamous that if you're not elevating yourself to this certain level, then you're screwed.
Yeah, it's so high stakes. It's like
what's
that was one of the thoughts I had is it just feels like there's so much to lose when you have this mentality. It's all or
it's
nothing. I
all or
have to
nothing.
be yeah, I have to be this Chad that's like jacked, tall, I have hair, I have money, and I have status. Therefore, that's the only way women will like me. The more you buy into that, the harder you fall when you inevitably don't live up to that expectation. It makes sense that there's so much depression and thoughts
Mm.
around suicide. And
Or mass murder. Like
yeah,
in this article that I read, there's been at least well, the article mentioned at least three different instances of either shooting or some sort of terrorist attack where like a person drove their car through a crowd and that's not a person, a man, a young man, and their Facebook or whatever their social media choice was full of like hatred towards women and incel behavior. And it's like, this is so it's not just like it's dangerous to the individual because it's so all or nothing and it can, cause suicidality, but it's also just dangerous to like the public and to women, obviously. So
yeah,
that's why I feel like it's such a good idea, and that's probably to talk about it. And it's also why I was so nervous to talk about this subject because it's insidious and it's
hmm,
dangerous to the world as a whole. What I think the insidious nature of it is a part of it is like they do take kernels of truth, just the same thing that like Donald Trump does, if I'm being completely honest. Like a kernel of truth, like
yeah,
government spending is outrageous. We're all like, yeah,
right,
we're on board. And then they just go full bore in the wrong fucking direction. And
Hmm.
you're
right,
like, okay, so women are attracted to men who make a lot of money. It's like, yeah, who isn't? Like, if I was dating a woman who was making a lot of fucking money, I'd be like, this is amazing. It's like,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah, sure,
yeah, and then there are instances of women, with this what it was the fit in
Fresh and fit.
podcast or whatever, Fresh and
fit
Fit
podcast.
podcast. There like
Hmm.
there are women, and I've seen Reddit posts and Nice Girls the subreddit where like, oh, you don't make enough money, like I'm out. And so like there are people out there, but they take like anecdotal evidence and they're like, this is what all women do, and it's like, just
Right.
for a minute, can we think critically about this? And like, also, if you run into a woman like that, do you really want to be with that person? I don't know. Now I'm getting all.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Dude,
Yeah, yeah, I
you
love
hit
it.
on that something I was thinking about too, just critical thinking. I feel like that is something that is missing so much today. Like if you see
Yeah.
something that sounds ridiculous or seems out of place, maybe just don't take it at face value. Maybe do a little bit of research or maybe reflect on how people really act in the real world. Because to your
Yeah,
point, it's so easy to find these clips that go viral because they're controversial, because they spark anger and outrage, and those flood the internet and get passed around, and then you get so influenced by that. And if you continue to watch that type of content, you do start to believe that this is going on everywhere. It's Fox News, it's like 24/7 anger baiting and making people think that the world is or the country is being overrun by immigrants because that's all you see on Fox News. It's the same concept. And the
Hmm.
anger and the controversy is what sparks the engagement, unfortunately.
yeah,
Right.
And I think that's what's spreading this stuff like wildfire is because that's what
yeah,
drives clicks and views.
Yeah. I think you're touching on a huge topic of like, hate is so much easier than love. It's
Mhm.
truly like the starkest difference is like it's so much more difficult to love someone than it is to hate them, especially if you disagree with them.
There's something about what you're saying, Blair, that I feel is true, but also it's also so much harder. There's this dichotomy there where it's easier to fall into it and to go down that rabbit hole, but then I think that when you're there, that place where you're actually existing, you don't realize how hard it is on yourself and how much you're spewing hatred and also feeling that internally. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas then to do the work to understand the complexity of feminism and to care about other people and to care about other ethnicities and to do all that work and educate yourself, that takes a lot of work and that's hard.
Mm.
But
Yes.
once you're there, I feel like that place is filled with love, is filled with empathy, is filled with goodness, it's filled with rich relationships. And that is so much easier than living with hatred. So it's like, that's sort of the dichotomy there. It's easier to fall into it, but it exists in such a dark place.
Yeah.
I feel for people who have to live and exist there. It's not a good
Exactly.
place.
And I think the one word that you touched on, I feel like, is getting there's like an attack on empathy, which I'm so confused about, because a lot of the time it comes from people claiming to be Christian or, you know, religious in some capacity. But I think it was maybe Andrew Tate, I can't remember, and don't quote me on this, but someone was like, empathy is the enemy. And it's like, I don't fully understand how that concept is getting into the mainstream. But like empathy to me,
Yeah.
again, is like the one human, not, I guess it's not fully human, because we've seen clips of animals exhibiting it as well, but like it's just, yeah, it's just love.
Yeah. Doing the research for this video, watching Andrew Tate talk, so many of the things that he says, I'm just like, what the fuck, dude? Like,
Yeah.
like, who hurt you this much that you have to be this way? And yeah, I mean, he's just like saying stuff that we said, you know, it's like we grew up thinking that saying something was gay was an appropriate way of responding to something in, you know, middle school and high school. That was normalized, and he's still saying that kind of thing in this YouTube video last month or whatever it was, and he's just calling stuff gay, thinking he's so cool and so special for using that in his verbiage. I'm just like, what the fuck, man? Like,
there's still a whole group where that type of insult lands. I was watching a video it was one of the Fresh and Fit guys who was on like a college university campus like a month ago, maybe less, I can't remember, doing these like debate tours on college campuses. And so like people, like college kids could like come up and like talk to him and like debate him on different things. This kid was basically talking about like how he had a girlfriend, they were committed to each other, and it was like they like really, she like really supported him, and he's like, well, you're a simp, basically.
Oh, yes.
And I was just looking through the comments of the video, and it was like, oh yeah, this guy's definitely a simp, this guy's gay, this, like,
what does a simp mean?
it's basically like a guy who is, I think it comes from the word sympathetic, a simp for women. So you're advocating for women just so that they'll like you for that reason. So that makes you a simp.
Oh yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and the like normal people don't know this type of terminology. You just prove that.
No.
Like you talk to anybody in you know, just about anybody in your real life, and they're not going to know like any of these terms. But yet this community still exists, and it's very much influential. And I could not believe it as I was scrolling through the comments on this video of how many people were insulting this like 18-year-old kid probably for respecting his girlfriend and like appreciating how much like she's benefited his life. And it just goes to show how much just that like comment of like, oh, you're gay for that, or you're a simp, that's still an insult in 2025. Like that's still working,
right? Yeah, to be honest, I didn't know what the incel stuff was until we talked about it on that other podcast episode. Like this whole world is sort of cracked open for me as a result of this podcast. And it's like,
I do want to point out that because we are white, hetero presenting men, like we haven't had to deal with the manosphere, having to learn about like incel culture. Like this is because we aren't the ones who getting impacted by it. Yeah. So I just want to point that out because I think that's important. Like but yeah, this world has been cracked open for me as well, just trying to figure out how it has taken hold and so strong. It's actually wild. I mean, to get back to the like the gay that's gay comment, I think I saw a clip of Andrew Tate saying, or maybe I don't know, one of the Manosphere influencers saying something to the effect of like, if you're having sex with women and not attempting to have a baby, if you're having sex with the
Right.
intent of just having sex for pleasure, like that's gay. And that's where I was just like, okay, we have lost the thread here.
Boy, you really have to twist yourself into knots to
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah.
Because that's like what all this is
Wow.
about. Like I think Elon Musk is another example of this. Like I want to have a legion of women or a legion of children with a number
Right.
of women because that's like the masculine thing. It's just
Mhm.
insane to me.
Mm.
And that
Yeah.
kind of gets into like I'm sure you guys as well as I, while doing some watching of these videos, like the whole idea of like the alpha male is like,
God.
it's so ridiculous. First of all, it was based on a study of wolves that ended up being completely false. That there's like an alpha wolf and they're the dominant one in the pack, which turned out that's not even true. But that like spurred this whole idea of like being an alpha male. The idea that again kind of goes back to that like being of like a higher social status.
Mm.
But like if you believe that, then that means that there's only so many guys who can be the alpha
Yeah.
male. And like if you're following someone like Andrew Tate or something like that, then is he the alpha and doesn't that make every one of
Yeah.
his followers the beta? Like how does that work?
Yeah.
Like the whole
Yeah.
concept is just again critical thinking. You just break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
You can go like,
Yeah.
no, this makes no sense at all.
Wasn't there? Didn't I send you
For
that
sure.
clip? There's a comedian or something who was like, "There's only one alpha, and it's Joe Rogan, and you're just
Yeah.
you're just
Yeah, right.
more." I gotta send, or like maybe we'll
I
post that
haven't
little.
seen that clip. That's funny though.
Oh man, I definitely had to show it to you. 'Cause it actually is
Yeah,
right on
yeah.
the money with what you're
Yeah,
talking
send
about.
that.
Speaking of Joe Rogan, I'll still find myself scrolling on Reels or whatever it is, and like a clip of Joe Rogan shows up or a clip of Theo Vaughn shows up, and I'm like, there are two people who, when they're having either like a funny conversation or an interesting conversation with somebody that I respect, like those podcast episodes, I find myself listening and watching.
Yeah.
But then they've fallen into the trap of the manosphere and the interview with all the seedy people that suck. And I'm like, fuck you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
platforming like Nazi sympathizers. You're like, what are you
Mhm.
doing? Like, why are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually phenomenal. That was Blake. You had mentioned your potential foray into
Mhm.
going into the manosphere. I feel like mine could have been Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn,
Yeah.
those type of guys. Because I back in the day when before I would say pre-COVID for Joe Rogan and probably Theo Vaughn as well. Their conversations were like super interesting. They're the way that Joe Rogan asks questions, I'm like, he's got this endless curiosity that I'm like, that is actually important. That's how a person should be, is like asking a lot of questions. But then there is the other end of the spectrum of like, oh, I'm just asking questions when it comes to like
Yes.
really
Yeah.
controversial, terrible topics. And you're like, no, you can't ask questions about something that we all have agreed many, many years
Yeah.
ago. I'm not gonna be
Like,
able to
what if
pull something
Hitler wasn't
specific,
really
but
bad? I'm just
yeah,
asking questions.
Yeah.
You know, like, are you serious?
like,
Right.
yeah, that's not a question.
Didn't we put
That
that
is
to
a
bed
settled
about like
debate.
50, 60 years ago?
Yeah.
Longer?
80 years ago.
80
80 years
years
ago is
ago?
when,
Yeah.
yeah, is when, actually, I think yesterday
Yeah.
was the 80th anniversary of Hitler
Yeah.
killing himself.
I think you're right. That's crazy.
Yeah. But Jamie, you mentioned Theo Vaughn. There was this clip that I remember seeing of him. He had great episodes of his own cocaine addiction or drug addiction and talking about that. I'm like, great. That's the type of shit we need. We need people talking about, men specifically, talking about the difficult things that they're going through, hence this podcast. And then he had Tony Robbins on and talking about
Yeah, I
like,
remember you sending that clip.
and it was great. It's like, all right, so you're talking about
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
all right, I have to get rid of this part of me that I cherish, that's the only way I've known how to be, but I know it's this detrimental part, and that I can, we can again put another, maybe we shouldn't link to Theo on at this point. But it was just such a great clip. You're like, all right, so this is someone and he started crying, like, or getting emotional, like on the podcast with
Yeah.
Tony Robbins. I'm
Yeah.
like, yes, this is what men need to see. But then, yeah, again, it just goes so far into the weeds of really,
Right.
yeah, and then the critical thinking
Well,
dies.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Unfortunately, the hold that they have. I was watching somebody talking about this recently, but it's like the hold that they have is so strong now at this point, is so developed that Pete Buttigieg is an example of someone who is now entering the manosphere. Like he just went on
Andrew
the
Schultz,
one podcast, I forget what it's called.
Flagrant,
Yeah. And
another Incel
Flagrant. Yeah.
for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. But that, unfortunately, now what's needed is for people to enter that world and present their perspective, because they're the ones who are so influential in the world of men.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel like it's called the manosphere for a reason. It's because like those ideas just like get regurgitated over and over, and it's a bubble, a sphere, it's a bubble. So
It's incestuous. Yeah. They're all going on each other's podcasts and doing all this shit.
just spreading these ideas, and nobody is there to like combat those ideas or like provide a
Challenge
different
them. Yep.
perspective. So yeah, I think it's cool that he's doing that, and at least on that podcast, he seemed like he was getting through to them a little bit. But
Yeah.
I thought it
Yeah,
was
for sure.
so ridiculous. I think we all saw that clip where I think it was Andrew Schultz was talking about how like he used to align more with the Democratic Party because they were like the ones that are cool and they were like getting laid, and that was why he liked them. And now it seems like the Conservative Party is more doing that. And it's like, that's your reasoning for that? That's as deep
Yeah.
as you're going. Like it's just
Yeah.
like, oh, this party seems cooler because
It's
they're
all
like
vibes, man.
they're like, yeah, it's all vibes. And it's like, okay.
Vibes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
That's I think
World.
I think-
Idiocracy in real life, man.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Yeah, we're living
Dude,
it. Dumbest
yeah.
timeline imaginable. But no, I think that in the Pete Buttigieg interview on Scholl's podcast, he was like, "You got to give me something." This is Andrew Scholl's talking to Pete Buttigieg, being like, "The Democrats have to give me something. Like, you know, even if Trump is bullshitting us and making us believe lies, like at least he's giving us like a good feeling." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like you want like." Yeah, I don't even know how to dive into that annoying.
Yeah. Yeah.
just-
Well, the one thing I saw him saying in relation to that was that Donald Trump speaks, even though he's a billionaire, he speaks like not a billionaire. He speaks sort of like someone from, a neighborhood in New York or something
He
like
speaks
that.
like
It's
he has
like
a
he's
third grade level education.
right. Right, which speaks to a lot of people who are looking for vibes, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't speak to me. It doesn't speak to Blair, obviously.
Yeah.
It doesn't speak to Blake. But it's like we're obviously just very, very different than Andrew Schultz.
Yeah. I feel like we're more and more are living in these like completely separate realities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you can find any level of support that you want for like a certain idea that you have. And you can probably find a whole community that will validate all your ideas. And
Yeah.
the Manosphere is just a prime example of that. Like you slip into that and you can literally live in this bubble. I mean, it's, in some ways it's like religion where you kind of find
Cult.
yourself a set of beliefs that others around you believe too. And it becomes very, very dangerous because if those ideas aren't ever countered or you're not, again, critically thinking, you can just slip more and more into these radical ideas.
I do think I'm convinced, and maybe this is the optimist in me, but I'm convinced that if you were to take the majority of the young men who are falling into the manosphere and put them into group therapy spaces or therapy spaces, they would be so ripe for just all sorts of emotions that are just like simmering under the surface, like all these different things. I just think that there would be a huge wave of healing for men if we got them into the right spaces.
Yeah.
And this is my hope for this podcast, and my hope for the world is to reach them and bring them into this world instead of that world, and try and capture those people. But I know it's few and far between, but that's what I would really love to see
I think
happen.
part of what you're describing is like is what we've talked about in our another episode that society tells men that we can feel is anger. So again, these predatory incel type of manosphere content is like aimed directly at activating that anger because they have so many emotions
Yeah.
underneath that. But anger is like the one they're like, oh, I can
Yeah.
access that and I can utilize that and put that into action. I can hate women. I can hate anything else, and that'll drive me. It's yeah. So it's like I guess our attempt at this podcast is to like drive the change of that we want is more geared towards love and like appreciation and
Mm-hmm.
openness.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, that's the harder path. It's so much easier to get
Yeah.
angry and to look for others to blame for all your problems because we're all looking for answers and we're all looking for meaning, and sometimes it's hard to self-reflect and be like, maybe I am the cause of some of my own problems.
So much easier to play the victim.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Just to double down on the like anger point, it's not just that that's the most socially acceptable emotion for men, but that's also what drives engagement and drives action. And so some of these, again, I agree, predatory kind of influences are like, the anger and the outrage is what's getting me money. That's what's paying me, is because that's what's
Mm-hmm.
driving the
Mm-hmm.
engagement.
Yeah. How much do you think these predatory like man influencers, like how aware do you think that they are that they're playing into this? Like from
Oof.
Joe Rogan to Andrew Tate, I feel like Joe Rogan's got to be aware. I feel like he's intelligent enough to know that he's doing something. He's playing a game. Whereas like Andrew Tate, I feel like is really actually like fucked up and bought into his own message. You know what I mean?
I think it's so difficult to know. I think if you put any of those influencers on a polygraph and ask them like what they believe, I feel like they would believe the bullshit that they're spewing. I think
Yeah.
they're too far into the manosphere, into the beliefs that
Yeah.
they've been curating for years and years.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Blair. I don't know if they're like sitting down going, okay, how can we really rile people up? I think someone like Andrew Tate has the instinct to do that. I don't know if he's like
Mm.
necessarily sitting down and writing down like, oh, this will really rile people up. He just has an instinct, kind of like Trump, for what will drive media engagement and attention. And it's just a lot of like saying controversial things. And some people actually will say, like I saw a few comments of people saying like, oh, he just says the really controversial stuff. He kept on saying like, women can't drive, they just can't drive, and they're saying, oh, he just says that just to because he knows it'll rile people up. And it's like, okay, but for what purpose? And again, it's just, I think to me it's an instinct that he has that will bring him engagement. Any
Yeah.
news, any press is good press, and that's what he cares about.
Mm-hmm. The one notion that I think we started to talk about was like the victimhood, the playing the victim. Trump is the king of fucking playing the victim.
Mm-hmm.
But when they show things like graphics of like, oh, 92% of the coverage of me is negative, it's like, well, yeah, stop doing fucking dumb shit then. They're mutually exclusive or not mutually exclusive. I can never do that one correctly. But the men's rights activist was like the actual thing that I was thinking of when talking about victimhood. Like men's rights activists are like, oh, because women are getting more rights, or LGBTQI like people are getting more rights, like somehow that strips away my rights and makes
Mm-hmm.
me less powerful in some capacity. And it's so far off the mark. It's frustrating to even
Right.
start to
Yeah.
talk about.
Like, what
Yeah.
rights have we
Yeah.
lost? None.
None.
Right. Yeah. That is one area where it's a nuanced topic and something I want to tread carefully into, but it's like there is some version of the world where of course men have never lost their rights and never lost their power and all this stuff, but there's some kernel of truth to the feeling that men are having around when so radical feminism talks about all men are bad and that sort of
Mm-hmm.
verbiage. It sort of turns off this like primal part of a man's brain where it's just like, I'm not bad. Like,
Yeah.
you just sort of like react to it.
Yeah.
But to like understand and dive into and educate yourself on the complexity of that is hard. And so it's easy. I can see and sort of empathize and see the easiness of falling into the trap of you're saying all these shit about men. I feel like a good man. Therefore, radical feminism is a problem because I'm a good man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't fuck with me.
Mhm.
So that's another area where I feel like maybe it needs to come from men, or needs to come from people like us, where it's like, I see what you're saying. Like, let me validate your feeling. That's probably hard to hear. But
Yeah.
also let me then educate you and address this. And because it's like, it can't be women, because women are angry. They're upset. They've been treated like shit for so long.
Yeah, millennia.
And they have a right to say these things about men. But we as men who understand that perspective can empathize. And that's another sort of like, let's reach our hand out and try and bring them in
Yeah.
and bring
Yeah.
in our perspective.
I think the other topic that we want to discuss at some point, or I think it's maybe our next episode, is like the patriarchy. And I think we were talking about it when we were discussing what we wanted to talk about. It's like a similar idea that you just talked about. Is like, as soon as a man hears like we have to destroy the patriarchy, they're like, or just not even that explicit, or just talking about the patriarchy. Like, men, I feel like, turn their brain off. I know this. I've been a I've been a culprit of this, where I'm like, all right, let's talk about the patriarchy then, and then Ben, turned my brain off in a sense, but like, once you start to like hear the full range of information over the course of like thousands of years, you're like, okay, we need to actually discuss this topic and not just turn it off and be like, okay, the patriarchy isn't the problem. We can't talk about that. It's like, no, we actually need to talk about it. And the thing that I referenced was, when we were talking about it, was not only do we need to talk about it, we need to hear about it from someone who looks like us. I think that's super helpful. I had a conversation with a group of friends where they were talking about a conversation that they had previously. This black woman and another white guy in the group previously had talked about how everyone's a little racist. And the white guy was like, no, he immediately was like, I'm not racist. And which is very, I'm a good man, or I'm not racist. So this
right.
black woman was trying to tell him like, all right, so yeah, we all are a little bit racist in some way. And anyways, their conversation went south, and not like anger, but they were just like, agree to disagree. And then she told us in this conversation, she was like, months later, you contacted me, and a white guy had posted a video, and you had talked about like, oh, I understand now. And she was like, oh, you just needed to hear it from like a white dude. Like, all right. So I feel like that's important to talk about too, is like, that's why also probably the Manosphere exists. It's like, it's typically white guys. I mean, I don't know what Andrew Tate is, but like talking in circles or talking in incestuous nature, just among themselves, and not getting into the core of like the actual conversation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think a lot of guys, to what you said, Blair, do kind of like shut their brain off when they hear the term patriarchy. It's like, oh boy, like, what are you going to blame me for now? Is like, I feel like what guys will jump to. But in reality, unless you're like a top 1% wealth earner, then the patriarchy is pretty much working against you too. So it's like, we need to not fight amongst like men and women. We need to be looking at, some of these things as systems in place that are really working against all of us, rather than just falling into the trap of, oh, you're blaming me. No, it's not that that person is blaming you as a man for all their problems. It's the system that's causing problems for really everybody. And that's probably a whole nother episode that we should
a whole nother
tackle
topic. And that was
that's a big one.
It was brought up to me. I shared our podcast with a friend, and she was like, you guys everything is like, I love what you're doing, but it like, you are all talking about like, all the topics that you've talked about are kind of just circling the edge of the real deep issues. Basically that, the patriarchy harms everybody. The loneliness epidemic, the anger talk, like everything we're talking about is inside of this larger conversation about the patriarchy. Again, we'll get it. Point, but it was really good feedback.
Well, that might be a pretty good spot to wrap things up. I feel like we probably just scratched the surface on a lot of things. That's a big topic, but hopefully we we touched on some things that resonated. This might be a topic we revisit and maybe dive into some more specifics, but this was kind of our first entry into it. For a couple of us, I think probably the first time we'd done any research or seen much of this type of content. So just wanted to kind of cover with a broad brush, and we'll dive into it more later.
If you're watching this on YouTube, comments galore, please. We'd love to hear what people are thinking about this topic, what we should have discussed. That's how we are able to figure out our topics, honestly, is from feedback. So please provide some if you have some. Also, if you're watching this and you are an Andrew Tate fan or think Joe Rogan is the savior of everything, contact us. Maybe we'll have you on and be like, all right, let's have a one-on-one conversation and like figure out what we need to be talking about.
Yeah. Be fascinating. Thank you all for listening, and we will catch you guys in the next one.
All right, see you.
Thanks all.
Okay. That's good. We got some good faces. Good job, Chief.